Hello and welcome to the news for August the 21st. You may be watching it on channel51.com.au, listening to it on WRMI radio, or in the syndicated video version on the Cafe Locked Out network. Welcome to today's news. And there is a lot, as usual, to get through. And we'll start today's news with the revelation in news.com.au. Pauline Hanson has revealed her brutal comment to Sussan Ley at a private dinner, where she said, "You won't be there." Senator Hanson told Sky News she was dining with Ley, who she described as nice but not conservative, when she made a candid prediction about her future within the Liberal Party. Details of when and where the dinner took place have not been disclosed. To me, she's not too far on the left, the One Nation leader told Andrew Bolt of Ley. "I actually had dinner with her and I actually said to her face, I said, 'Sorry, Sussan, you won't last the distance. You won't be there at the next election.'" The remarks come just weeks after Senator Hanson blasted Ley and the Liberal Party over the timing of their net zero review, which is being undertaken alongside a National Party review. Shadow Energy and Emissions Reduction Minister Dan Tehan said earlier this month his review of the party's policy could take 9 to 12 months to complete. "I'm just blown away with that. 12 months, my God, where have they been?" Hanson told Sky. If they hadn't seen what was going on in our country with the cost of living, industries going under, 30,000 small businesses closing, manufacturing going overseas, they're absolute fools, and that's what I will call them. Taking aim at the coalition, she said the parties do not put across clear policies and criticised their response to her calls for a Senate inquiry into gender dysphoria. "When I put up a bill that I want a Senate inquiry into gender dysphoria and what is happening with their puberty blockers and kids having these operations and bits and pieces cut off, the coalition were kicking and screaming in the beginning, not even wanting to vote," she said. Hanson acknowledged that Ley might prove her wrong, and the Liberal leader said she would do exactly that. Hanson said One Nation is currently polling at 9%. And since 2016, she said, we've actually won 11 seats. That putting them up there with the Nationals. How about that? And of course, on this show yesterday, we suggested that One Nation send Stuart Bonds to Canberra, replacing Warwick Stacey. We'll see how progressive or how creative Pauline Hanson is in her appointment, which is due out in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, in other news, the Productivity Summit is going on. Headline in The Guardian today, AI doom, nature laws and solving the housing problems. 5 takeaways from day 2 of the round table. Well, let's show you a little bit more detail. Progress on budget sustainability. The government is optimistic about efforts to lower spending, including on the NDIS and the age pension. The Social Services Minister, Tanya Plibersek, on Tuesday announced plans to end the freezing on the deeming rate used to calculate welfare payments. The freeze has cost the budget about $1.8 billion. Plibersek said a phased return to pre-COVID settings is appropriate as inflation pain eases for households. Meanwhile, Mark Butler, Health Minister, said the 8% growth target for the NDIS was simply unsustainable. Growth is now closer to 11%. Butler wants it cut to 5 or 6%. He's expected to join a session on efficient and high-quality government services spending and care at the summit today. Meanwhile, this graph has appeared explaining NDIS growth, the change in the number of participants in the NDIS in the 24-25 financial year by primary disability. Look at that, way out in front with 56,000 cases. Autism, the next highest intellectual disability at just 4,400 by comparison. That's 93% less than what you're seeing there in the rate of autism, and those numbers go right down to Down syndrome, just 84 cases, spinal cord injury 309, cerebral palsy 533. But 56,000 cases of the NDIS. Goodness me, I wonder what causes it. And why is it we're not allowed to know what causes it? And why are we not even allowed to ask what causes it? And here we have this problem where even the Labor government's realising that it is a problem. And you wonder why we can't look at these situations and therefore wonder, again, is this part of a great big grand plan? Meanwhile, they also talked about AI at the summit. Business leaders and experts talked up the potential of AI. Meanwhile, ACTU Secretary Sally McManus backed a worker-centric approach to rollout of the technology. Meanwhile, the Productivity Commission's chair, Danielle Wood, said AI could lift the average worker's income by $4,300 per year over the next 10 years. While acknowledging AI's potential, McManus said we shouldn't just say automatically we're all going to be better off because of AI. We've got to make sure that we are. It may boost productivity. It may also just boost profits. McManus said she wasn't advocating for over-regulating AI, but then the old idea of the doomer approach, that a Trump billionaire let it rip approach. So once again, Labor, lefties, two sides to every story so they can be right all along. Still can't quite work out how AI is going to deliver you $4,300 a year pay rise each year because of productivity. Wouldn't you think you're going to become redundant and therefore not needed if the AI can do your work for you? So people will have to be quite careful here. Maybe engage their unions if they're that way inclined to see how they're going to be supported and why it is. If you walk into a supermarket, for example, well, you now have trolleys with little tiny computers on them tallying up as you go to make it more convenient for staff not to have to work there. So it doesn't quite add up. Meanwhile, on the environment, reforms gather pace. A discussion on better regulation and approvals involved the Environment Minister Murray Watt, who was in charge of the rewrite of the Howard-era Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. Meanwhile, Kelly O'Shannessy, the Australian Conservation Foundation chief, said increased productivity was meaningless if the planet was overheated and natural environment was lost. Goodness me, it's freezing and it's wet and it's 15 degrees. Global temperatures somehow going to rise to 18.5, and that's what we keep thinking about. Thank God there is a US government who's saying that carbon dioxide is not a poison. Meanwhile, National Construction Code, with most agreeing that we need to make it easier to build homes. Daniel Mookhey, the New South Wales State Treasurer and the Business Council of Australia's chief executive, Brand Black, supported a temporary freeze of the National Construction Code. Mookhey, speaking on the sidelines of the roundtable, said a pause in adding new federal regulations would certainly lead to more homes being built. If the national code is frozen, it gives us a bit more time to get the interactions between national standards and state standards clear. But equally, it is more to give a lot of confidence to people who are looking to build right now. And here we go again, more red tape continuing. It seems that the system is intent on being there to preserve its own longevity more than anyone else's. But there was conversation about living standards. And again, Danielle Wood reminds people that if productivity that drives improvements in living standards, well, a little bit of a voice of reason. Meanwhile, average productivity growth in the decade to 2024 had slumped to a 60-year low of 0.4%. Now, according to slides obtained by The Guardian, she blamed the slowdown on the waning boost from technology, low rates of business investment, a less dynamic economy, and lack of interest in pro-growth policy reforms. Well, how is AI going to fix any of that? So it seems that what happens with these Labor governments, these big organisations, is that they look to the trajectory of what is happening out there in society and use that to therefore line the pathways in the directions where they want to go. And when they get found out and it's too late, they become not the progressives, but the reactionaries, in the way that Mark Butler is now telling us that he needs to cut the NDIS from 8%, which has gone to 11, down to 5 to 6%. But meanwhile, no one wants to talk about autism, which is primarily the main reason for people getting onto the NDIS in the first place. Well, in a different story now, going to Mamma Mia, they've done a story on the Australian homeschooling boom that no one is talking about. How about that? There you go. It's quite a big story. And they talk about the rise of homeschooling. And a recent report from the New South Wales Department of Education, the number of registered homeschooled children in the state rose from 3,300 to nearly 13,000 from 2014 to 2024. In Queensland, over a shorter period of time, they've noticed that the registrations have grown by 122%, and in the secondary by 3,900, 221%. So in that state, as of August last year, 11,300 students registered for home education. And what they are talking about now is that it's an alternative education academic. This is Nikki Brunker, in fact, from the University of Sydney, who also homeschooled her son herself and spoke to numerous parents over the course of her research. One common theme that emerged is how vilified home education still is, with parents reporting they often face the stigma of their children not being socialised. We've actually got to stop and recognise that the fact that the people are moving in high numbers to home education is a reason for us to open up the conversation about education. Well, as a parent of homeschooled kids, I will say my kids are far more socialised than less socialised through the homeschooling scenario. One of the reasons is that in homeschooling, there are plenty of activities available, and you obviously get your kids involved in extracurricular activities. They can go to sporting events during the day, for example, and still participate in local school sports and other ideas. But the thing is, in homeschooling, there is no age hierarchy. There's no year 7, there's no year 6, there's no year 5, there's no year 4. The kids just work at their own pace. They obviously follow certain curriculums, but they get to socialise outside of these age hierarchies. So a 12-year-old can mix with a 9-year-old, an 11-year-old with a 6-year-old, doesn't really matter. But the point is that when you get involved in different activities and play to your strengths and weaknesses, you can do science projects on the forbidden YouTube, for goodness sake, and you can also be involved in school plays, athletics carnivals, and various other different projects on farms, etc. And when you get involved in a community, it's not the case of working on your own in isolation. On the contrary, you start pulling your resources together outside of the hierarchy of the education system. So in looking forward, they say parents are jumping to the homeschooling option in order to support the welfare side of their child's learning. That's, of course, one thing, is to therefore be able to find where the kids have weaknesses, where their strengths are, and cope as well. They talk about the idea of being in the top 10% or, in fact, the bottom 10% and judging accordingly. And the key takeaway is that the government is committed to ensuring that every Australian child enjoys the benefits of education, regardless of background, through evidence-based and measurable improvements. The Australian government plays a leadership role in national priorities for school education, with the state and territory education authorities taking responsibility for policy and regulation related to school-age students engaging in school or state territory-approved alternate activity such as homeschooling. With what works for one family may not suit another circumstances, learning styles or lifestyle, so the decision to homeschool shouldn't be taken lightly. Well, of course not. No one jumps into homeschooling as a way to take things lightly. On the contrary, they do it because they take it extra seriously. Well, we're now seeing that over in the United States, here we go, the head of the Housing Department, Secretary Polt, has called out fraud at the Federal Reserve, pointing to the signature of Lisa Cook, who happens to be the governor of the Fed, in a case of what appears to be genuine mortgage fraud, claiming 2 primary residences, one in Michigan, the other in Atlanta, both as primary residences. And look at the dates, pull apart. It's not like you could lose your memory. One in June of 2021 and the other in July of 2021. So here he is. Polt is saying right now, do not declare 2 principal residences in President Trump's America. Mortgage fraud is a serious crime and must be prosecuted as such. That is a big call. Let's now take a listen to the story now, where we're going to pull it up from Newsmax.
Serious mortgage fraud allegations and a criminal referral to a Biden-appointed Federal Reserve governor. President Trump, you just saw, calling on her to resign and calling out Fed Chair Jerome Powell, again, for not lowering those interest rates, saying it is hurting Americans and their ability to get a mortgage. We take you live right now to White House correspondent Mike Carter, who's tracking the very latest on all of these new developments for us here. Mike?
Hey, Bianca, good afternoon. Well, as the world awaits an update on Russia, Ukraine, today President Trump shifting his focus back to the economy and railing against one of his favorite targets, Fed Chair Jerome Powell. The president on Truth Social this morning saying, could somebody please inform Jerome too late Powell that he is hurting the housing industry very badly? People can't get a mortgage because of him. There is no inflation, and every sign is pointing to a major rate cut. Too late is a disaster. Well, speaking of mortgages, we have yet another mortgage fraud allegation today against a prominent left-leaning official, with both Adam Schiff and Letitia James facing mortgage fraud probes. Today, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Bill Pulte, is urging Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, a 2022 Biden appointee, over a pair of mortgage fraud allegations. Pulte alleges that Cook falsified bank documents and property records to acquire more favorable loan terms, potentially committing mortgage fraud under the criminal statute. According to Pulte, Cook obtained a $200,000 mortgage in June of 2021 on a property in Ann Arbor, Michigan, agreeing to occupy it as her primary residence for at least a year. Just 2 weeks later, however, she took out a $540,000 mortgage on a property in Georgia, also declaring it as her primary residence. Pulte claims that Cook later listed the Georgia property for rent, suggesting she misrepresented her circumstances. And today, Pulte is even looking into another property owned by Cook in Massachusetts. Lisa Cook is a former Michigan State University economist whose previous work included exploring the impact of racial injustice on the economy. In November of 2020, Cook was named a volunteer member of Joe Biden's Presidential Transition Agency review team to support transition efforts related to the Federal Reserve. Also in 2022, Cook was approved by the Senate along party line vote to become a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, with Kamala Harris casting the deciding vote in her favor. No charges have yet been filed, and it's unclear whether Bondi will open an investigation, but President Trump seems to have made up his mind. President posting today, Cook must resign now. If Cook doesn't resign, Trump is reportedly considering firing her outright. All right, Priyanka, today at 4 o'clock, the president will swear in the new ambassador to the European Union. This man's name, Andrew Puzder. He is the former CEO of CKE Restaurants. That's the restaurant chain that owns Hardee's and Carl's Jr. Bianca?
Big story, isn't it? And it doesn't seem like much when you consider all of the crime that we've had to endure for such a long period of time. Russiagate, Epstein files, etc. Why mortgage fraud? When you are the Fed Reserve Governor and you are making a rule for yourself different to everyone else, and is that entitlement? Is that being above the law? Or is that it doesn't really matter and everyone should get access to cheaper interest rates under the primary place of residence rules? Well, that's the point, isn't it? How can you have one rule for one and one for the other? The Magna Carta was all about so many hundreds of years ago. Well, Ed Martin has confirmed that he has been working with Tulsi Gabbard and promises that people involved in the grand conspiracy will be held to account. Meanwhile, Tulsi Gabbard is striking 40% of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. How about this one? Saving taxpayers almost $700 million a year. It's a big deal. That's a lot of layoffs. And this was reported in the New York Post, $700 million, eliminating politicized officers. Tell you what, it doesn't get much bigger than that in terms of efficiency, and they keep doing it. This is part of the idea of reducing government, the opposite of what you see in governments run by left-wing political parties. So it seems that they want more power until they have to hold political productivity summits and tell everyone how they need to increase taxation and lower spending in order to make ends meet. Maybe they need to be met less of those. Well, also happening in the United States, the Venezuelan president Maduro is being called out. Navy ships heading over in that direction. Are they going to take out that illegitimate president? Here's Caroline Levitt.
Venezuela, and there's 4,000 Marines on board. Are you looking at the possibility of boots on the ground there?
What I will say with respect to Venezuela, President Trump has been very clear and consistent. He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible to justice. The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel. In Maduro, it is the view of this administration, is not a legitimate president. He is a fugitive head of this cartel who has been indicted in the United States for trafficking drugs into the country.
Well, today I had occasion to speak to investigative journalist Scott Wheeler, and the full interview will air this evening at 7:30 p.m. on channel51.com.au. The subject of Maduro came up and we had a good investigation. I'll give you a glimpse of it now. I'm reminded as we're going to come up to sort of towards Russiagate and then to present day that you mentioned earlier about the embarrassment or something on those lines around the corruption. And I noticed that the Trump administration has gone after Maduro of Venezuela, accusing him of effectively being a major drug lord, and now sending Navy destroyers en route to Venezuela. Like, they are after this man. And I'm wondering if that is the Trump administration planning to set a precedent here for going after heads of government or heads of state in the process to where we're headed, because Russiagate, every day, Tulsi Gabbard seems to be coming out with more information, laying the groundwork for what potentially should be indictments, maybe even perp walks, arrests, handcuffs, etc., and eventually convictions and people locked up. Looking now at what you're seeing here, do you think that maybe as we look at Russia, maybe starting at Russiagate, you very on picked this one. Can you describe what you saw back in 2016 and what you reported back then?
Well, you make an excellent point about his approach to Maduro when he nailed him as, called him a narco-terrorist and a criminal, U.S. criminal, so that your observation on that, I hadn't even hit me until you said that. That puts him in a different category. So that we couldn't legally take out or arrest a foreign head of state, we could arrest a criminal, and a narco criminal especially. That kind of categorizing Maduro that way could lead to something very big, I think, and that could end up very interesting, and it might set a pattern in the South American, Central American drug trade that's going on there, and arms trade. Now there's human trafficking. It's become a sordid mess, billions and billions of dollar business. And so that he comes off, he does not come off as as shrewd as I think he really is as a president. And I think most presidents within my lifetime, with the exception of Reagan, would probably have been too afraid to do something that bold with Maduro and to take that kind of action. It'll be interesting to see how far he can get with this. It could be really good for this hemisphere if he was able to capture him and bring him to justice, the way we did H.W. Bush did with the Panamanian dictator Noriega.
Meanwhile, the subject changed to Hillary Clinton. We talked about the links to Uranium One, the 20% of uranium sold to Russia, and of course, the collusion that was involved, as well as the hypocrisy. Take a listen to how Scott was able to bring the receipts. Looking now, Hillary, we've been following this for a very long time, and around that there was the 2012 Uranium One scandal. She sells 20% of American uranium to the United States, and then of course Bill Clinton starts doing these $250,000 speeches, and then Hillary starts getting $100 million donations in the lead up to the 2016 election to the Clinton Foundation, one of which I think was $145 million US by two Russian oligarchs. How can you have the gall to take that donation, take those speeches, and then invent Russiagate? Is this entitlement? Is this insulation protection? Or is this a psychopathic woman hell-bent on world power?
Well, here's what happened. About June, some part of this is my analysis. Part of this is fact. I can prove it, but part of this is my analysis of what happened, because knowing Democrats typically have a political kind of idiom. They say, if you've got a problem, either hang a lantern on it or accuse your opponent of it first, so that anything that comes back looks like they're just trying to say the same thing. Clinton, that was a real political strategy for him when he was running for governor, when he came up through the Arkansas ranks. They had a lot of experience doing that. So they would accuse their opponent of what they were actually doing. And then anything that came out after that looked like it was retribution. So about June of 2016, Hillary, it was actually very shrewd political thinking. She thought, that there were a lot of conservatives who did not trust Trump on national security, and didn't because when I say we, I mean I was one of them. I take that back. It's not that I didn't trust Trump. I didn't trust Putin. I didn't trust Russia, and we were still skeptical of what Putin might do, and we recognized that he was dangerous and had nuclear weapons. And so there's a few of us who were paying close attention to that. She thought she could pick out a layer of that and go for and pull him over in support of her. But more importantly, she knew she had a Russia problem and a Putin problem. So their strategy was, let's go blame Trump. And Trump just kind of stumbled into it, saying they kind of tricked him even by saying, he doesn't know Vladimir Putin. How's he going to stand toe to toe? Oh, I know Putin. I've met Putin. We got along great. They met not in person, but in a green room. Putin was in a green room on some network, and Trump was in the same green room, and they were talking to one another. That's what Trump was talking about. So Trump kind of took the bait, and he goes right in saying, I can deal with Putin. And so then they come out and accuse him of colluding with Putin, which of course was like a humongous joke, because to me, I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding. After 8 years of Obama and Clinton, 4 years of Clinton, why in the world would he want anybody but Clinton in there? Not to mention the fact that they had been had those close relations. They were hiring Clinton to come over and speak. And so it was clearly a ruse. And so about October, when it started getting, the media played right along. None of them, apart from me, actually went and looked at Hillary's history with Putin and saw that they were good friends, and that there was no distrust there. And nobody else did. Everybody else played along with what the Democrats wanted. So about October of 2016, right before the election, I wrote for Forbes a piece that laid out the case, what Obama and Clinton had done for Putin. And there was no way that Putin would want anybody but Hillary to be to win that 2016 election. And they were sure that she was going to. And so they as it turns out, Gabbard, the CIA picked up that they had a blackmail file prepared for her, and they were ready to go weaken her she was already playing Putin's game. She wanted to shut down oil production in the United States, which is great for Putin, because Russia's about 35% of their economy is oil exports. So what the policy she was promising just on itself would have been great for Russia, shutting down American oil production. And Trump was saying the opposite. We're going to, and ultimately did, made us oil independent in his first term. That hurt Russia, not helped.
And in our final story of the day, Stephen Miller refers to the plans of the Trump administration to go after the traffickers. Say what you like about Epstein, these guys are not stopping at all.
We've seen, as you know, 500,000 children trafficked over a 4-year period in the United States. This administration is going to investigate every instance of child trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, child smuggling, and all the attendant crimes involved in that. And our message to everyone in the country is to cooperate fully with Immigration and Customs Enforcement so that we can end the scourge of child trafficking and child abuse that has been endemic these last 4 years.
Something that you should have that you haven't reported. As you know, 300,000 children are missing, right? 300,000 under Biden. We've already gotten back 10,000 of those children, and we have a lot more planned to come back. We're getting them back by the thousands, but 300,000, and as of this morning, over 10,000 we've gotten.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's coverage. If you'd like to check out the long-form interviews, Scott Wheeler will be on channel51.com.au tonight from 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Friday, you'll get a look at Richard Gage and 9/11 Truth from 7 p.m. on the jasonqcitizen.substack.com. And on that same page on Saturday, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the first of 2 interviews with Dr. William Mackus. Thanks, everyone, for watching. I look forward to your company tonight. tomorrow and the next day. See you all on the next.